Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the SAIEE Smart Cities Chapter webinar on the role of IoT in building smart cities. Before we start, a few webinar considerations. Attendees are reminded to ensure the volume is turned up on your device. Ensure you have a stable internet connection. This will ensure the streaming and audio will run smoothly. Attendees can ask questions via the questions panel located within the GoToWebinar control panel. And by default, the control panel is located on the right-hand side of your screen. The chat function is reserved for webinar organizers and panelists to communicate with attendees. Attendees will not be able to chat with each other, however, are encouraged to ask questions. A recording of this webinar will be made available on the SAIEE YouTube channel, SAIEE TV, under the Smart Cities Chapter playlist. The QR code on your screen is actually to take you to the registration page on the SAIEE TV. So register, it's free. A certificate of attendance will be issued a few days after this webinar. I'd like to introduce you to our host tonight, Mr. Bongumza Mendu, who is a senior technologist at the National Transmission Company of South Africa and who serves as the chairperson of the Smart Cities Chapter at the South African Institute of Electrical Engineers. In 2022, he was awarded the SAIEE Keith Plowden Young Achiever Award, a prestigious accolade recognizing his outstanding contributions to electrical and electronic engineering. He's also a technical committee member for the International Conference on Energy, Electrical and Power Engineering and actively contributes to the discipline as a peer reviewer for leading journals, including IEEE Transactions on Power Systems, IET Generation, Transmission and Distribution, and various Elsevier publications. His research portfolio comprises numerous journal articles and conference papers demonstrating his commitment to advancing power system engineering and smart grid technologies. Over to you, Bongumza.
No, thank you very much, Mins. I will switch my camera on that note. I hope I'm audible. Good evening, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for taking time to join us for today's webinar on the role of Internet of Things in building smart cities. We appreciate your presence and we hope your engagement will be fruitful for this discussion of today. As been said, I'm Bongumza Mendu. I'm the chairperson of Smart Cities in the institution of SAIEE, and I will be the moderator for today's session. Definitely, it is truly exciting to bring together industry leaders and professionals to explore how Internet of Things and is shaping the future of urban development. So maybe in terms of the purpose, just the high level. As urban population grows, you will know now and then people from those areas that were previously disadvantaged are migrating from those areas to the urban areas and also maybe to cities for various reasons. So the pressure now it comes to the infrastructure to those areas that are migrating to, of which now we talk about public service that also need to be looked at, the environment, sustainability, that is also increasing. Or cities in the worldwide are turning now into a powered smart solution to improve things. There are several things, but maybe I will just touch on a few things, such as energy efficiency. For an example, they're looking at optimizing power distribution and reducing wastage. And one maybe will look in terms of traffic and mobility, where maybe one can or dive into things like enhancing public transport and reducing congestions, as you will know, especially in the city of Johannesburg, where we are. Then you will look also in terms of public safety and security, things like using real-time data for crime prevention and emergency response. And then one of the key things that one can pinpoint is more in terms of sustainability and climate resilient, where developing net zero building and mitigation urban environmental risk. Those are the key things that one can look at when we talk about the theme of today. But however, the path to this IoT adoption comes with a lot of challenges. as I mentioned, challenges that include infrastructure gaps, cybersecurity related risk, and also economic visibility concerns. So those are all things that, end of the day, yes, we can move or transform from where we are to where the future might look like, but there's always challenges around all the technologies that we bring to increase or to improve our daily lives. That's why today's discussion is critical to all of us that are currently joining. We will explore how South African can overcome these obstacles and implementing the IoT solutions that are scalable, secured, and investment ready. Then today, we are aiming to unpack these complexities, professionals, examine successful global cases, and discuss how South Africa can effectively integrate IoT into smart city strategies. Therefore, to unpack all of these challenges, complexities that comes with all of these technologies, we are privileged today to have two distinguished speakers with us today who will assist us to discuss some of the key things that we need to take note of as we move further with this technology. Then our first speaker is, not wasting any time, will be Mr. Adigan. You will forgive me Peter, with your surname there. So Peter is a professional engineer registered with Engineering Council of South Africa. He holds both BSc and MSc in electronic engineering from University of KwaZulu-Natal. In 2012, he joined Eskom Distribution as an engineer in training. Since then, he has worked as a quality of supply engineer and currently serves as senior product development engineer at their distribution head office. He has contributed to numerous innovative projects resulting in 3 local and international patents for Eskom. Additionally, he has been responsible for designing, developing, manufacturing, and deploying hundreds of condition monitoring IoT devices and systems within Eskom distribution network. Ladies and gentlemen, please assist me to welcome Mr. Adekam. Over to you, sir. Thanks.
Thank you. Am I audible? I hope so.
Yes, you are.
Okay. Just waiting to go into full screen mode. Yeah, good evening, everybody. Yeah, my name is Peter Adigan, as Bongumus has already said. Tonight, I'll be taking you through the topic of the role of IoT in building smart cities. And this is the content of our presentation tonight. So we'll first define what IoT is, what a smart city is, and we'll look at benefits and limitations of both. And then we'll look into 2 case studies of where IoTs have been implemented in 2 different continents: Barcelona in Spain, in Europe, and Toronto in North America, which is Toronto is in Canada. And then we'll look at 7 lessons we can learn from those 2 case studies for the South African context. And then from there, we'll then go into some closing remarks and I offer up anyway some kind of framework that will hopefully help when implementing IoT in a smart city. Okay. So first up, what is IoT, right? So Bongumus already said, Internet of Things. That's what the acronym IoT stands for. But IoT basically refers to billions of interconnected devices, machines, and sensors that collect and exchange data via the internet or via an internet connection. These devices they gather data for a wide range of purposes in various industries. So they're used all over the place and in various industries. There is some interesting boundaries of what makes an IoT device. For example, one would think maybe that your smartphone is an IoT device. That's not the case, but somehow a vehicle is considered an IoT device. But essentially, an IoT device is something that uses sensors to collect data from its immediate surrounding, and that data is then sent off some way to make some intelligent decision and hopefully take some action. That's a summary. So we'll look at IoT devices from a different viewpoint. So we'll look at what makes up an IoT system. So essentially, an IoT system is made up of a sensing device on the left today, followed by a communication medium, followed by some remote data storage, and then artificial intelligence, which is a new addition to IoT, sometimes called AIoT. But normally, previously anyway, the action is what results from the processing of data, but we'll go through it bit by bit. So let's start with the, I'm not getting, there we go. Let's start with the, with the sensing devices. So essentially, your IoT device, the front-end device, has to have some kind of processing power, some kind of microcontroller or microprocessor, and it has to have some sensing involved, whether it's visual, whether it's auditory, or even outside the auditory range, or whether it's something that makes contact with the medium that it's on to be able to collect some kind of data. So you're talking about vibration sensing, you're talking about temperature sensing. For auditory, it could be something like ultrasonic, or it could be it could be in the frequency range or auditory. And then for visual sense, for the eyes, we're talking about cameras and those kind of things. And then with the sensing device comes some, so I'm getting some slow response here on my end. There we go. With the sensing device comes some ability to do some wireless communication through some of these communication protocols. This is by no means exhaustive, but these are some of the more common communication protocols that IoT devices use. And that is used to essentially to transfer data from the device to some backend cloud storage or cloud computing platform. And more often than not, you will have these cloud computing platforms that aggregate data from maybe different sources. So it might be collecting, might be taking weather data, and maybe I don't know, combine it with some network, some electrical network data, and to make some kind of decision. But essentially, at the end of all of this is that some action needs to happen, right? So what happens is that essentially some dashboard needs to show what if something is wrong, which will obviously hopefully lead to some kind of work order being generated or some kind of report that gets created so that something can be done about it. But now what is happening is that we're not just the information is not just going to a dashboard or generating a work order anymore, which involves humans or it's a manual process. But what is actually happening now is that we're actually using the information that's coming from the cloud to fed into some kind of artificial intelligence system that then goes out and does some action itself. Okay, and then moving on from that, if we look at it, there's also on the front end of IoT devices, there's something called edge devices, right? So edge devices are looks to collapse most of what is called an IoT system into one device. So instead of simply having only a processor and sending the data off to be stored somewhere or to generate some kind of decision somewhere, edge devices combine the sensing, the cloud storage, the cloud processing, and the artificial intelligence. I think most commonly known is TinyML, pioneered by Google. And that's usually all involved, everything all combined into one chip, and those are usually found in edge, what is called edge devices. So they're an evolution of your normal IoT device. The benefits of having edge devices is obviously that there's less data that's being sent across your network, there's less data having to be collected, so less data volume, less network traffic, of course, because you're sending less data, you're making decision on device. Less backend processing, again, because you're sending less data, and more security, right? Increased security because you're not having to send data across a network. Decisions are being made on premises, on the device. Some kind of intelligence decisions being made. Okay, so brief history. So this person in the slide is called Kevin Ashton. He is considered the father of IoT because he coined the term IoT. He worked in a manufacturing plant, although he's also an academic. But when he did the work, or when he first started using the words IoT, he worked in a manufacturing plant and he introduced the RFID technology to track product inventory in that manufacturing plant. The idea of putting sensors on everyday devices, though, has existed before 1999, and it's been since 1980s even. So essentially, the reason why IoT has become so popular in recent times can be traced back to the original iPhone or the smartphones that we have now, because the creation of those low power microprocessors, low power consumption but very powerful processing chips led to IoT devices. Also, the improvements in battery technology has also helped because most IoT devices are powered from batteries. Right. So benefits and limitations of IoT. Once again, benefits that you'll find in IoT devices. These are the most common ones. So when you're doing they help you with monitoring the environment. So things like air quality monitoring, monitoring for gas leaks, monitoring for just for health reasons. I think monitoring your environment has become quite crucial, and the IoT devices enable this. Data-driven decisions, so we can make better decisions by simply having IoT devices collect the data, and if the data shows it, data doesn't lie. At least anyway, if the data quality is good, the data won't lie. And essentially, we can make better decisions this way. Health tracking, so this has to do with, of course, with the smartwatches that we have now, which we can carry around with us. And we can have people, I'm sure there are countless stories of lives that have been saved from smartwatches that have picked up some anomaly, and people have responded in time to be able to and gotten to the help that they needed. Overall, if we're looking at the industrial space, there's increased efficiency in applying IoT, right? So that's because when you have IoT devices, you are able to automate a whole bunch of things that usually would require some manual or some person to go out and do something. You can actually do the automation through IoT. And of course, predictive maintenance, which is the big one if you are in utilities or in any kind of manufacturing or retail space, maybe even. Predictive maintenance allows us to be able to do so it's a very good thing that IoT enables, because it saves big industrial companies instead of having to rely on a scheduled maintenance, they can do predictive maintenance. They have IoT presence. Of course, with this comes also limitations. So there's security of data, there's privacy issues with IoT. Anything that has to make a journey across the internet has to have will always have a limitation of data security and data privacy. But there are obviously there are lots of protocols of cybersecurity processes that are in place that, if implemented, you can actually stave off most of these. So, and then of course there's the data volume, right? So because you can collect a lot of data, and at some point you can run out of space, and you might have to always keep increasing your space as you collect more and more data. So these are some of the markets where IoT is present. I think we see here that in most industries, right, there's IoT presence from utilities to healthcare, manufacturing, even in our homes, IoT is present. Transportation industry also has IoT presence, retail, and smart cities, of course, also has IoT presence. And that's why we're here today to discuss what role IoT plays in that space. So then we get to what is actually a smart city, right? So in my research, I came to the conclusion that it actually depends on who you ask what a smart city is, because there are over 100 definitions of smart cities from one of the publications that I read. And but today, what we'll do is we'll just consider three. So let's go for the first one. So this is defined by the United Nations Special Agency for ICT. It says that smart city is an innovative city that uses ICT and other means to improve quality of life, efficiency of urban operation and services, and competitiveness, while ensuring it meets the economic, social, and environmental needs of present and future generations. So that is a really good definition there. But there are two more that I would like us to also look at. So definition number 2. A smart city is essentially the effective integration of the physical, the digital, and human systems in the built environment to deliver a sustainable, prosperous, and inclusive future for its citizens. That definition comes from the British Standard Institute. It's also a really good definition. And then the last one, I think these three I've chosen because they actually more or less they touch on the same things. So the third definition says a smart city is a city that increases the pace at which it improves social, economic, and environmental sustainability outcomes, responding to challenges like climate change, rapid population growth, and political and economic instability by improving how it engages with society, number 1, applies a collaborative leadership methods, number 2, works across disciplines and city systems, number 3, and number 4, sustainably uses data and modern technologies to provide better services to its current and future inhabitants. So that's by the Smart Cities Strategic Advisory Group. Excuse me. So that's quite a mouthful, but you will see where all of this is makes sense later. Okay. So now let's look at some of the benefits that have been linked to and limitations that have been linked to smart cities. So the city has savings from obviously efficiency. We talked about IoT earlier, resulting in savings, but a smart city essentially results in savings because you are increasing your efficiency. Once again, you're making data-driven decisions rather than gut feel decisions that may not work out. Then there's sustainability aspect of this as well, where there's obviously a drive to look for new sources of power to power the smart city initiatives. And then of course there's safety involved. So when we say safety here, we mean that we use it to in some way to combat crime, to make the city safer. And then improved quality of life for all its residents, right? Because if the people within the city are not benefiting, then really I think the smart city is not really very smart. But once again, some of the limitations that have hit smart cities is where a technology first approach has been made, where usually big tech companies come in and they try and wow everybody with some kind of fancy technology, and usually that ends up failing. You will see this in one of the case studies. And then there are privacy concerns in terms of who owns the data, what is it being used for, why am I being sovereign when it doesn't benefit me in any way, and so on. And also, I think lack of empathy, right? So most of the smart or some of the smart initiatives, the city initiatives that we see, come with private entities who come into cities who maybe they are able to twist the arms of the city officials into letting them do what they want, but they don't actually solve or actually make anybody's life better. They don't solve the problems that are affecting the residents of the city. So there isn't actually an empathy for making people's lives better. There's just always a drive to increase their knowledge and feed this data back into their own artificial intelligence systems. Right. So, and then one of the things I did was to look, before we go into the case study, was to look at what DALL-E. So DALL-E is one of the ChatGPT capabilities. It's a Gen AI. And I asked it what a smart city looks like, or what are the components that make up a smart city. So the following picture is what it came up with. So if you look at this, this is what the DALL-E thing looks at or sees a smart city as. And you can see here, this is obviously seen from a point of view, or from a data lens point of view, or from a cyberspace point of view, where the physical city buildings is overlaid with the cyber space. So you're seeing data hubs in space, you're seeing Wi-Fi, you're seeing cloud storage, and then you're seeing connected vehicles all over the place, right? There are obviously sustainable power generation points in this poster. There's cloud storage. There are connected devices all over the place where you see the blue hues, or the hues there. There are virtual hubs all over the place. There's data lakes, connection points where data is stored and harnessed for some use. And there are connected vehicles as well there. And yeah, so this is just a way of trying to get what this Gen AI systems thinks a smart city should look like. But let's go a little bit deeper than that. Let's see what smart city should look like from 2 case studies, right? So the first one is was a case study about smart city implementation in Barcelona. So Barcelona is a city in Spain. It has a textile manufacturing and commerce hub background, and then had some hardships in the 1980s. But over the last 40 years, it has essentially overtaken Copenhagen, Amsterdam, and Vienna as being known as one of the smartest cities in Europe, right? Or actually, the smartest city in Europe. And they've done this by implementing a strategy, and then that strategy enables them to have things like innovating parking systems, LED street lights that auto adjust depending on the weather, smart waste bins, and a whole lot more, which we'll look at just now. So how was this achieved? What they did was they first implemented a strategy called e-democracy, right? So they established an ICT platform, and they used it as a channel to connect their citizens to the city departments, right? So they used that ICT platform as a way of getting being able to be closer to their citizens, or to the residents, let's say, and not have the residents always have to come to their offices if they want to do if they want to do some things, if they want to get things done. So another point is that they made local tech companies. They put them ahead of rich multinationals. They created an open digital marketplace and open sourced all the data that they're collecting. So they got rid of the typical IoT model, right, which are closed networks, rigid contracts, and for consumers, and mega corps who end up owning the data, right? So they got rid of all of that, and they open source their data, right? So the government owns the data, but they provide equal access to local businesses who might want to do this, who might want to do something with the data. So on top of that strategy was this sensor network called Centilo, right? So Centilo was essentially used as a storage point. So and they then use the data that I sourced in Centilo to help influence future planning projects. So you can see something like this is it goes back to what we were talking about earlier about data-driven decisions. And then examples of some of the sensors that they had in place. So air quality sensors, noise detection sensors all over the city, parking sensors to help the drivers, taxi drivers in downtown Barcelona be able to find parking quickly, and also to help residents. So residents can actually pre-book a parking slot for the time that they will be there. So when they arrive, the parking slot is free. They just go in. They don't want to do what they need to do. and they leave. And once the parking bay is free, somebody else can come and use it. Temperature and humidity sensors, street lights, as I mentioned earlier about street lights that dim and brighten depending on the weather. And then a really good return on investment that they found was that they just by automating the watering system in their parks, that they were able to save 500,000 euros per annum by being able to just water the parks at just the right time. So that's a really good example, a use case of IoT performing good work. But further than that, one of the things that they also did was to come up with this decidim, so which I'm assuming is a Catalan word for we decide. And this platform is essentially a so we have social media. They call it a political media, right? It's a political media platform. And what it does is it allows citizens to propose policy. So a really good example of this is, say for example, a citizen feels that the noise level in that area is generally, they just have a feeling that the noise level in the area has gone up over maybe the last few years. They can go onto Decidim and actually pull the data and look at it, and because there's noise level data all across the city, and they can use it and say, and actually, if the data backs them up, they can attach the data to some application to the city for some kind of policy change to happen, whether it's for noise, for some kind of noise control, I don't know, bylaw or something to be brought in, or maybe no noise beyond this certain time. And you can see there that citizens who are able to do this will obviously feel a lot better, because then when they see the sensors around, they know that this thing is actually benefiting them. So the key takeaways from this first case study: one is, if you start with technology without a strong idea of why you're actually deploying the technology and for what kind of needs, then you only end up solving technology problems. So essentially, technology needs to be an enabler, or IoT needs to be an enabler. This is something that they learned in Barcelona, rather than the solution. Yeah. I'm running a little bit behind time, so I'm going to just move forward a little bit into the Toronto case study. So Toronto was more a negative case study. So I'm going to rush through quickly on what they did and what they did wrong. So the very first thing that they did was that they did wrong anyway, was to bring in an outside company. So Sidewalk Labs, which is a subsidiary of Alphabet, which is, we know Alphabet is Google's parent company. Sidewalk Labs basically won the I guess would be tender or the project to a $900 million project in Canada to do this work. And they had a vision for a smart city that was built from the internet up. That's a direct quote. And they would feature things like robotaxis, autonomous garbage collection, heated sidewalks for some reason. Well, I suppose Canada is very cold, so that does make sense. And street crossing monitoring, park bench usage monitoring, and so on. But from and here's what they got wrong. One of the things that they didn't understand, Sidewalk Labs, is that Canadians are actually a lot more trusting of government than private entities. And the Sidewalk Labs obviously didn't understand this, and they didn't try to understand that as well. The second part is also this, that the local culture wanted engagement. So Toronto residents wanted to be consulted and wanted engagement, but Sidewalk Labs only wanted a top-down approach. They wanted to tell these residents about the fancy technology that they were going to bring in and what it was going to do, rather than to actually engage with the community or with the residents. Essentially, at the end of the day, everything didn't work out, right? So, and then we go to the lessons learned here, and essentially understanding the local context is very important if you're going to do something like this. So a top-down approach may work in an autocratic society where you have an authoritarian in charge, and I've given some examples here of countries or cities where, countries in this case, where we have authoritarians in charge, but smart cities have worked well because the authoritarian speaks, and then the people go and implement, and the citizens don't have a choice in it. But if you actually are a democratic society, citizens or residents, let me say, will need to be consulted, and they want to be consulted, and they should be consulted, right? And so a technology approach to smart city only works if, one, you actually solve the problem. So the problems most cities have is affordable housing. They want the commutes to be shortened. They want the public transit to be improved. They want to make sure that you actually are helping their environment, because we've all become climate conscious in recent years. And yeah, and then they want their life to be better in some meaningful way, because technology has increased our productivity, but there's arguments to be made whether it's actually made our life better in general. In the end, what happened was that the project got canned and got stopped, and the sidewalk labs eventually walked away, and a reboot had to happen. So this is a picture on the right here of the reboot that happened, where they actually went more for a greener, a green aesthetic throughout that piece of that strip, a 12-acre strip, rather than, and very little technology was actually implemented in the end, because that was not what Toronto residents wanted. So it is very important to know what the residents want. Here I've got 7 lessons for the South African context. Of course, we've talked about this. So it needs to be inclusive, it needs to support, it needs to solve the problems of the residents. 2, there must be an underlying strategy. Technology implementation cannot be the strategy. There needs to be some underlying strategy, which technology then helps you to enable. 3, it must actually attend to the needs of people, affordable housing, shortened commutes, things like that. 4, it must foster some thing with the local residents. So, one thing is that you must surely have some strategy that prioritizes the local entrepreneurs, the local startups and businesses, so that they can also take part in this and benefit from the smart city, rather than some outside entity. 5, sustainability. I think that's a no-brainer. 6, it must make the city safe, right? So it must be safe. And then 7, and I put this as the last one, is that technology should actually come last when you're implementing. So at the pre-implementation stage, technology should be the last consideration. You must have all of these other things in place first, then technology enables it. If you allow me, I have put together what's this being maybe a proposal or a frame, or a very basic framework anyway, with strategy at the center. Strategy then forms the policy, and then from there, then you can have the technology. So at your pre-implementation phase, technology needs to be there on the outside. At the very core of your implementation, of your pre-implementation, must be strategy, and your strategy needs to speak to crime, service delivery, housing, natural disasters, unemployment, whatever the issues in your city is. Secondly is the policy. So now you're defining the do's and don'ts, the roles and responsibilities, benefits and limitations. And then lastly comes technology, which then helps you to implement what you're doing. So now to the last slide. I know I've gone maybe a little bit over time. I think this really explains things well. So once you've now implemented the technology, it needs to be positioned in such a way that it is actually in the middle of residents and the city, right? And not in the middle to separate, but in the middle to connect, right? So that's what technologies like IoT needs to do. It needs to be a connector of the residents. So I've put different types of residents here. So it might be just residents, it might be entrepreneurs, it might be academics, it might be city planners. And it needs to bring them closer to the city. And then so much the platform that this IoT technology enables, right? So there needs to be some kind of platform that allows the city, especially in a democratic society, that allows the residents rather to be able to take part in bylaw proposals, or in some way, in some meaningful way in the city affairs, right? Rather than them having to always go out to a department to do something. technology can be used in such a way that it actually brings the city closer to the residents. Yeah, so that will be my parting shot, in that I will just go back to the last slide and say technology needs to be on the outside when this planning stage is being done, and technology then needs to be on the inside when we're after implementation, and it needs to be on the inside so that it connects the residents and the city officials. Yeah, so that's my last slide, and I've just got some references here. So thank you very much for the opportunity. I will now return back to Mings. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Atukon, for the very insightful presentation. I think your discussion on real world case studies and strategic frameworks, I think is very critical in terms of our now South African context. Yeah, no, we are looking forward. We're gonna explore further that during our discussion. But I'm not sure, maybe before I introduce our second speaker, I'm not sure means if it's possible the attendees to put their questions on the chats, if there's any option for that while the presenters are presenting. I'm just looking at the time so that at least when the second speaker finish, we look in terms of unpacking all of the discussion.
Yes, for sure, Bongumza. I encourage attendees, you can post your questions in the questions panel. And if you have a specific question for one of our panelists, just use his name in the front, so we'll know who to ask the question to. Thank you.
Okay. No, thanks for that, Ms. So now, allow me to introduce our second speaker, Mr. I told you that I've been practicing your surname here. Mr. Mthwetu is a young and dynamic and intelligent South African with more than 10 years of experience in the energy and finance field. He is accomplished in the academic field with multiple conference papers that are internationally recognized from Hong Kong to the UK. He was named a Global Goals Ambassador for SDG7. He is a member of the Queen's Commonwealth Trust. Sorry, there's just this thing disturbing me here. He has raised over 1.5 million in dollars in finance for firms, and has been a small business mentor for the United Nations SDN. He obtained his MSc in electrical engineering from the University of Cape Town with a record completion time of within 9 months. He is part of professional organizations, including the World Society of Sustainable Energy Technologies, Energy Networks Associations, America, Rewiring America, South African Energy Storage Association, and Young Go. I hope that is correct, Mr. Mthwetu. Over to you, sir. Thanks.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Hope you can all hear me. My name is Savata, like he said, and I'm happy to be here. I'm going to talk about bankable IoT technologies for net zero buildings. So I like that the groundwork was laid for what is IoT in the first place, so I can move a bit more quickly with things that might be interesting on how to apply this IoT. So we're going to briefly cover about me. We're going to talk about bankability for buildings and South Africa's future in IoT. And then we'll close for Q&A. You can go to the next slide. So myself, I'm the founder, CEO of Solar Rays, an energy as a service company based in Sandton. We're on a mission to reward sustainability. Started in 2018, and we're lucky to be 1% of SMEs who survive 5 years in South Africa. Myself, I have over 10 years of experience in energy and finance, studied at UCT, and I'm currently part of a few associations, one of which is Interesting Energy Networks Association, which is in the United Kingdom, Rewiring America, which is the largest NGO in America, for electricity related reasons, and the Energy Council of South Africa, which is a very important association in South Africa. I'm interested in inclusive capital and sustainable development. So I'm going to be talking about issues that might spark a few of your interests, and I hope for this to happen because we need a 4x increase in renewables to reach net zero. We need IoT to reach net zero, and we need a sustainable future that considers future generations and past generations. Next slide. So I'm going to talk about bankability. So when you talk about IoT and bankability, this means you might need to use money to purchase IoT equipment, or you might need to use IoT to purchase something else. What do I mean? Well, let's focus on buildings. Buildings are where you live, where you work, usually something on top of the ground. And this is where SolarRays comes in. SolarRays is a company I started in 2018. Our value is increasing natural capital awareness using climate tech. So if you're building on the ground is a value upon which you are building your value, meaning your building. So natural capital is part of the game, and just being aware of that is our aim. So you might use IoT for site surveys. You might use IoT in a proposal. You might use IoT to continuously monitor something. If you have a building, like you see on the left, you might want to get finance to improve your building, which means you might need finance from a bank. So SolarRays has partnered with Avo for financing on certain equipment, but besides the equipment, you might want to continuously monitor the equipment. What does continuously monitoring equipment mean? Well, you can monitor it to know what the weather is, or what the power is, or what the sensor tells you the temperature is, or you could measure to ensure that your warranties are in place. Meaning, if something is supposed to last you 20 years, you might use IoT to ensure that it lasts 20 years, and if it needs to degrade at 1% per year, your IoT can help you sense that it is degrading at 1% per year. Because this might affect your debt covenants. So maybe you get a loan that requires 10 years and your equipment fails early, IoT would have helped you identify that. If you need to model a solution, meaning you need to propose an idea, maybe there's something you've never seen before. You need to go to a new country. You need to canvas a new proposal. You need to propose an extension to a building. You might need to use IoT. If you need to data collect, meaning you need to survey, you might need to use IoT. The simplest way of understanding IoT for data surveillance, you might think is drones, but like you've heard now from our previous speaker, you have more than drones. You have items placed inside other items. For example, you have sensors placed in street lights, sensors placed in street poles that do things like capture your license plate, capture the temperature. The most important thing lately is capturing carbon in the air, but those are particulate emission sensors. So sensors are used for many kinds of surveys whereupon you build your building. Sensors are used and they create data because sensors generally aren't like a book and a pen. So you need a lot of data to use a sensor. But what do I mean by data? By data, I mean you need data on the device, and sometimes you need data in storage. This is because sometimes the device alone is not strong enough to do everything. For example, smart cars. They use IoT, but sometimes you don't have a strong enough internet connection to be able to use that smart car, even though you might have enough data in a server. This is another chapter. But you might need to do assessments of the natural capital, meaning you might even need to do weather surveys before putting up a building. And the weather is part of the nature, so we call that natural capital, and there you might see as well. SolarRays, if you ever want to see what we're about, you can go to solarrays.co.za, and it's written at the bottom. Next slide. So bankability for buildings. If you have a building, how would you use IoT to diagnose your energy concern? Well, on the right side, you'll see IoT is used for energy by seeing it remotely. So maybe you're here in South Africa or you are in Barcelona and you need to diagnose your building. How do you diagnose your building without running to the building? You use IoT. IoT will help you figure out the percentage of your battery down to decimal places, like 95.1% full. That's the battery shown on the right here. It'll show you your power down to decimal places, like 1.08 kilowatts from the solar, as shown here. This is an off-grid system, hence the grid is on 0. It shows you your current load, 1.52 kilowatts, and that is where you have loads that need to be balanced and managed by further IoT, because maybe you want to reduce 1.52 kilowatts, but how do you diagnose that now? You might need to turn on and off individual circuits in a home, so you might need a second layer of IoT on top of viewing your energy. So IoT becomes a building upon concept where you add more as you wish to grow more in control of your future. How do you ask for help? If you need help with IoT, reach out to an SAIEE Smart Cities chapter member. Please.
Sorry, Sabata. Sorry to interrupt you.
Your scope, meaning your scope 1 and scope 2 carbon emissions. So what energy you're using now and what energy you might be using later, meaning energy used by others, is important. This means energy you purchase, you might purchase it from utilities that use fossil fuel, or you might wheel it from other places. So you might purchase it from neighbors. This comes into where you fit in. Load balancing is where you balance loads between things you have. Maybe you turn off your kettle to save your fridge. IoT can help you do that. So you turn things on at a different time. That's load balancing. But if you take this concept and expand it to your neighborhood, and you think of like communities, when people turn things on and off at different times, you get to things like wheeling. So maybe you now share your energy with your neighbor when you are not home. So IoT will enable things like successful wheeling in South Africa. And I think IoT is very important for that reason here. Successful grid feedback applications have been done by our company SolarRays and Bedfordview, where some people wanted to sell power back to Eskom, and we helped them become successful in their permitting requirements there. But this means they are now using their IoT on their inverters at certain times of the day to now program when they're selling power back. So IoT, you try place it in different places and inverters and sensors, but in your building, if you have energy needs, you might try to think of where you fit in and reach out to an SAIEE Smart Cities chapter member if you need some guidance. Next slide. So I'm going to touch on two things. IoT for a building retrofit and for a new building. So if you're retrofitting a current building, first things to think about, if you came to this session just to have an awareness, find someone who's certified in some way. Have them do an assessment for you. They'll give you recommendations. Maybe go to smart LEDs, use variable speed drives, turn things on and off in a certain sequence, condition monitor, etc. After you've done your survey, conclude a term sheet, meaning what you will do and what you will pay for. So maybe you want to do this and that, but you're only willing to pay for this and that. So you need to come to common terms on what is most important for your business for a triple bottom line. After that, then you use the IoT for lower O&M costs. So maybe you buy a machine and then you now include IoT on top of it so that you don't have to go to the machine every day. That means lower O&M costs. So IoT can help manage O&M costs, especially if you find yourself doing repetitive activities or activities that you find challenging. Next slide. Now, if you're using IoT for a new building, it's a kind of different step you take. Firstly, you need to think with your architect about the building envelope, meaning the exterior of the building. How does the wind hit every facade? The exterior, like even if you think of receiving an envelope as mail, the first things you touch on the exterior, like an envelope, that is how you think of a building. So the first things that the wind touches is that this is what the architect would call the building envelope. You would need to think of that for a new building, because then you can optimize how you use north-facing windows, how you optimize the angling of shade, etc. Then you need to assess, on top of the architectural design, your facilities manager assets. So do you need pumps? What assets do you need to run this building that is in the envelope? Once you've thought about your building envelope with your architect, and you've thought about the facilities inside of your building that you're going to have, maybe you'll have machines, maybe you'll have generators, whatever you're going to have. Once you've thought about that in the building envelope, then you put together a solution. A solution is usually a project, we'll use the word project, but it's usually a process leading to a solution. With this solution, you might need to find capacity, meaning you might need to have capacity in government for policy supporting your solution. You might need to have capacity with your funder who needs to review your solution. You might need to have capacity in your own company. At SAIEE, we help develop capacity, but World Bank and IFC also help develop capacity. You need to have capacity in the departments that review the proposals so that your proposals are reviewed most thoroughly. Otherwise, someone who doesn't know IoT will not notice that you have put IoT in your proposal. That is the point there. Then the last step is IoT for green building certification. So having IoT in your building considerations firstly gives you the chance of lower O&M costs, but it also gives you the pathway to green building certification because you would have thought of things like energy efficiency and time of use of energy. And those are critical concepts to get a green building certificate. And you might want one of those. Next slide. So now I'm going to touch on a couple other things. We do have a book in South Africa that is very important. It's by Fumene George Tsibane, Dr. Fumene George Tsibane. It's called the Nation Building Plan. It's talking about designing paradise cities. So if you are into designing cities and into town planning or even into policy making, your national building plans become important. This means South Africa's future depends on how we think of buildings in the future. So yes, we're taking ideas from abroad, but we now imbue them with our own Ubuntu. And therefore, we have our own just transition. So hopefully webinars like this will inspire people to get this book and start thinking of how to look at concepts that will help build a future city that we want to live in. Because South Africa has a very difficult history and we no longer want to build based on those old history principles. We want new ideas. Hence, it's a just transition when you're thinking about your building. And that's where bankability comes in again, because a lot of funders also want to see transition in their portfolios from a fund mandate perspective. So they might not have funds to build another building looking exactly like the old building. Then the funder needs to also show how they are having climate in their finance. It's called sustainable finance. So therefore, by you introducing IoT, it'll make it easier for you to justify how your building, even though it may visually look exactly the same, it may function better. Therefore, it's a different building. So we need to really think of incorporating IoT to solve historical challenges. Next slide. So I'll cover something here about some basics. So maybe you haven't heard enough of these words around bankability, and I want to include them when you make proposals or when you review proposals. So SAIEE is part of the Alliance for Climate Action. This is facilitated by NVI, C40 Cities, and the World Wildlife Fund, WWF. And the WWF released some common success factors for bankable nature-based solutions. From a technical perspective, from a feasibility perspective and a piloting perspective, from an investment structuring perspective, and from a revenue impact perspective. I'll just touch on this briefly, a few of the main points. Firstly, if you're technically setting up something, when you have a building and you're putting IoT in it, you need to have expertise. Get a consultant, learn something yourself, have expertise, otherwise you might be very far behind the solution. You need to have an enabling regulatory environment. So in South Africa, the Climate Change Bill of 2024 was released in the last quarter, Q4 2024, that creates an enabling regulatory environment for municipalities to consider climate finance. You need to have feasibility. A feasibility study needs to include things like business cases, economic calculations, dedicated ideas of where will the money come from. So when you think of a business case for your IoT solution, think if you will pay for it. Will it be debt funding, grant funding? Because this affects how you structure your financials. Because your return might be 50% with interest, 50% without interest. There are even other methods like Sharia that finance you differently as well. So you need to think of who you might want to work with so as you structure your project correctly. With your technical assistance, we have people like SAIEE who help with technical work, but you need to have technical input in your work. So you cannot only propose an idea, you need to have technical science-based targets in your work. So you need to use science. This could be a calculation or a sensory input. So you can gather a lot of sensor input data, or you can analyze sensor input data, but you need to have technical assistance and technical input. If you're investment structuring, meaning if you're not simply paying for it like you may pay for bread, then you might involve other people in the purchase, then we call that investment structuring, if it's not only you in the purchase. Or if you want to purchase it over a longer time, we call that investment structuring. For there, you need to think again, do you have any guarantees or any insurances? Do you need insurances? Is what you're doing risky? Is what you're doing helping solve a risk? So think of that. Think of the asset classes you're going to need. Because like I said, IFC is launching has already launched a 30 by 30 campaign for climatic thematic bonds. So if your building with IoT is going to be funded by a bond, that is a different structure. If your finance will just come from a 30-day term loan, that's a different structure. So these sound simple, but they are different structures. Then the final thing is revenues and impacts. Think if you have any offtake agreements. So are you introducing your IoT for your own benefit, or is there someone who wants the benefit? That's the idea of an offtake. There are funders who fund new ideas that create interest, and there are funders who fund ideas where there's already interest, and that's offtake, already interest. It's almost like securing a market. So if someone says they will use your cameras once you put them up, that is an offtake. But if you are putting them up to hopefully gather data to then hopefully talk to someone, you do not have an offtake. So just think about where you're using IoT, because everyone who's impacted could be your offtaker. You never know. Next slide. So now I'm nearing the end of the presentation. I'm going to touch on a few things. So on here, you'll see SA's future. So now I've touched on basic bankability. Let's talk about South Africa's future. Here you can see a BMW branded electric vehicle car charger. This is at Fumani Game Lodge, Limpopo Game Lodge, that's 5-star rated. It was on SABC News, I think also on their YouTube channel on 25th of November 2024. So this was like, what, 60 days ago. So electric vehicles are a new thing in South Africa. How is this important? Well, IoT helps us manage electric vehicles. That is why it's important, because if you want to turn your electric car on and off, if you want to load balance from a building perspective, not from a driver perspective, if from a building perspective you want to manage your loads like your lights and your EV chargers, IoT is how you're load balancing. And if you have multiple chargers, like a future fuel station, you would need to balance how you're charging across each electric car. And that's done again through IoT. You have solutions such as Schneider Electric, and SolarRays is a approved Schneider Electric retailer. Schneider Electric give you some equipment that is IoT tech that you can purchase, but there's other tech as well. So always think about it. We also work with Comba Solutions, who does telematics. They do telematics down even to the transportation level. So if you want to monitor a cold box of samples, where it's going, maybe for medical reasons, they would monitor that. So the future is linking telematics with future telematics. So linking the trackers with the electric vehicle load balancers. So even IoTs talking to each other and sensors and data talking to each other is where we're now going towards. Next slide. So here we see an example of IoT, meaning an example of Google Earth. And I say that's IoT because it's not Google Maps. Here we have a visual of SAIEE's campus, but it's more than just a map. At the bottom left, you'll see it says animated clouds. So you can view the past 24-hour cloud coverage as like a short a few seconds video. Not every weather station allows you to view the past 24 hours as real-time second coverage. This is the value of IoT. The sensor picked up the data and is holding it that I can now go back and look at that location and the weather pattern. That is the value of IoT. Another way you can look at it is you can model solutions. So you can see what's north, what's west. You can see in which direction you might need to expand solar panels, where you find shading. So you can use IoT halfway and you put your input the rest, or you can ask for it to do more work for you. Next slide. So SA's future, IoT tech companies. Myself personally, I've got an IBM Digital Award, but anyone can go for it. And I recommend you all look at IBM as one of the many companies for learning about digital technologies. They have items such as Watson, and SolarRays codes things such as Watson, meaning maybe you want an AI that does things for you. So instead of doing one thing every time, when something changes, it does something new as well. That becomes an AI. We code AIs, and companies like IBM have made open source AIs, well, not open source, but public AIs such as Watson, where you can build your own ideas. So you can build yourself your own butler who manages your house on their software. That's what I mean. On the left-hand side, you see Vector 3. That is an intelligent software for energy monitoring. So if you want grid level monitoring, like NRS approved monitoring, sometimes you can monitor your energy, but it's not to the level that's NRS approved. Vector 3 does it to that level, NRS approved. And you can measure harmonics to fifth level, even beyond. You can measure power, currents, GPS locations, etc. This is an example of IoT sending you data. So this Vector 3, you install it on your main meter point as like an installation, and then you leave it there. Then it either feeds back information to you remotely, or you can go back and collect the information when you're done. So these are IoT technologies that you can choose to use as well. You can go to the last slide because I think we're now pretty much done. The last thing I wanted to touch on is decarbonization. On the left-hand side, we'll see that electricity, industry, and transport account for over 50% of South Africa's greenhouse gas emissions. This is a graph from the Energy Systems Research Group in UCT. And therefore, we want to focus on IoT for the use of electricity, transport, and industry. In line with what was said by the previous speaker, waste is is an interesting thing to try add IoT to, but even from a decarbonization perspective, waste is only 4% of our greenhouse gas emissions in South Africa. So I also wouldn't recommend spending $900 million on an IoT for waste. But I would say look at electricity, transport, and industry. And this will help us reach net zero by 2050 as South Africa and reduce our 400 million tons per annum down to 100 million. Let's go to the next slide. Thank you. So I think I've covered pretty much everything. Hope I didn't take too long there. And I'll leave some time for questions. If you want to get to know anything more from this presentation, you can simply reach out. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you, Mr. Mthweku. Yeah, I think, yeah, very great presentation. Yeah, I think the role of IoT in sustainability and risks mitigation is very important as we also look in terms of the future for the urbanization development. Now, I'm not sure, because of time, I will suggest if there's any questions, we're gonna go straight to those questions for both speakers. So maybe you can switch off your camera, Mr. Mthweku. Thanks for that. So if there's any question on the chat or on the floor?
Bongumza, we have a couple of questions. Our first question is from Offensi Noah, who's asking, is the smart city definition mentioned by our South African president as a valid one? In short, does it mean the smart city in Gauteng has to be built from scratch?
Thanks, Mens, for that. I think that question will go to you, Mr. Peter. I think your name is better.
I'm giving you a hard time with my surname. To answer the question, I am actually not familiar with the president's definition, so I can't really comment on that. I don't know if it can be put in the chat, so maybe I can respond to it quickly. But I'm not familiar with the president's definition. But there's no reason to build a city from scratch. I think in this day and age, retrofits, the flexibility of solutions that are available in IoT space are such that the retrofit is going to be the way to do it, and you can get a lot of benefit from doing it. It's just about making sure you solve people's problems. So that's what I would say.
Thank you. Sorry, Bongumza, I'll just carry on with the questions. Another question from Offensi Noah is, this is related to Peter Adigun's presentation in light of case study 2, Toronto. If we relate this to South Africa, we find that some GIS companies have some smart city APIs behind a paywall. Should the public wish to develop better Gautrain geolocation applications, or even just to get SA Weather Service weather info, there's a paywall. Is a paywall a good example to make smart city go wrong in SA? Is it not logical, entrepreneur friendly from what I see?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, and once again, notice the similarities there about almost an external entity that who's driven by profits generation or profit maximization. There's nothing wrong with that, but it is, I think, on the city to enable the entrepreneurs within the city, and or for the city to actually make sure that the data is theirs, and then they can make sure that they open it up, because then you're inviting your locals or your residents to make it better. And of course, if they make profit, if your local companies make profit from that, then your profit it helps the economy of the city, rather than to have some entity who has the data for themselves and puts a paywall up. So yeah, I think there's a lot of similarities there between what Sidewalk did and what Offensi is describing there.
Thank you. We've got another question here for Peter from Vasu Chetty. He says, thank you for your presentation. Is there a smart cities framework / standards that cities are following?
There is in my research, I discovered a smart cities framework. In fact, it's called a South African Smart Cities Framework. It's in my reference slide. I'm not sure if the presentation will be shared, but it was written by Dr. Kevin Naidu, but it was published in 2021 only. And I'm not sure if there's, my search didn't reveal any newer version. So there is a Smart Cities Framework. Whether it's being followed is a different thing, or whether people are using it is a different thing. But there is actually, and it's a really, really good document, I must say. It's provided me with a lot of insight into at least the definitions and some of the best thinking around smart cities.
Thank you, Peter. Ladies and gentlemen, if you want the presentations from our speakers, you'll see the Smart Cities chapter's email address on the screen. Just drop an email to that, and our secretary, Tandil Wetu, will send on the presentation in PDF format to you. We've got another question from Kwakazili Matebula. He's, or she, my apologies. Where are we as South Africa in building smart cities? You find that there's no integration between our government departments. I see a need for improved coordination and decision-making across various governmental levels to ensure the success of smart city projects. The framework emphasizes the importance of aligning efforts and fostering collaboration among stakeholders to overcome these hurdles, but that doesn't seem to happen. Your thoughts, both gentlemen? Peter?
Yeah, it's a really difficult question to answer on where we are at as a country. I think it is really important. It is very important that it's the government that starts this, or that initiates it, or that coordinates it. Because if you leave it to some private entity, we've seen examples of how that turns out. So I'm not sure where we are at, but I think either way, it needs to be the government that plays a crucial role, because the government has the ability to be able to bring all these parties, or the different parts that needs to work together to make a smart city work. I feel, for me, I believe in the government, and I think that only a governmental entity can bring all those parties together and then provide an open source, or either that, or some kind of non-profit, or some kind of neutral organization that's not looking to make profit from it. So it's either one of those two. Yeah, so that would be my response to the question.
Thank you, Peter. I agree. Like a non-profit organization like the SAIEE, that's why we have a Smart Cities chapter. Thank you. Sabata, your thoughts?
My thoughts, I think they should look at COGTA. So there is a smart cities talk around government. So COGTA means the Department of Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs. So COGTA released their smart cities framework in 2021, but some things around the framework need to be implemented. So maybe they're not fully aware as the public yet. But from a government perspective, there is a regulatory environment starting to build up from the first COGTA Smart Cities framework. It was launched in Q1 2021, so around February, March. So check COGTA's databases around Q1 2021. That's when they released the Smart Cities framework.
Thank you. We've got a strange question from Kwakazili again, which is actually a good question from my side. I would like to know this. With the EV charging stations, can you charge an Audi on a BMW charge point? Are the connections universal or not?
Yes, they're universal, and that's the whole new thing. So 2 years ago, BMW didn't have this initiative, and we've chatted with them since then, and now they do universal ones. So it's no longer about only one charger for one car. I think that used to happen with companies like Tesla as well, but we don't want that spirit of people being excluded anymore. So it's universal chargers. The BMW is only the branding on the pole, but it's a universal charger.
That's wonderful. I wish, please, would you speak to all the cell phone manufacturers? Can we just have a universal charger for everything?
It takes long.
That'll be a good thing for smart cities eventually. Ladies and gentlemen, we've come to the end of the questions. I don't see any more questions from Gumza. I think we can end it off here.
Thank you, Mings. Maybe Mr. Peter and Sabata, I would have to ask, even if it's 1 or 2 questions, with just few minutes, that I think we still have some 10 minutes left before I can close. Maybe just to you, Peter, just as a takeaway now, what should be the top priority for South African municipalities in adopting smart cities technologies, just in your own understanding, based on also what we have, the insight that you have given us?
Yeah, I think it's exactly that. It's sitting down and coming up with a strategy, strategy that involves people, that involves the residents, that involves nobody. I think nobody knows what the problems of a municipality more than the municipal officials that live in the city, that work in the city. So they are the ones that are more attuned to what the problems are, and they should craft a strategy that solves those problems, or that enables, anyways, smart city to solve those problems. So yeah, that's what I would say as a parting shot, is that the municipality needs to be the one that comes up with the strategies, or leverage at least the existing framework, like I've mentioned, that smart cities framework, and which Sabata also mentioned, and build on that and craft something that is maybe unique to your municipality, and then from there look at what startups or entrepreneurs are local within the city that can help with building these things. And you know, we always say Rome was not built in a day. You know, some of these things they can be multi-year programs that where you start with one, and you solve one problem that affects the city, and then you solve the next, and then you solve the next, and you can go like that.
Yeah, no, great stuff. Then maybe, yeah.
This is Sabata here. I think
Yes.
that yes, Sabata Mchekwa here. I think 2 things. Firstly, the enabling environment is starting. I think we need more communication. So if people can just communicate a bit more about what they want, you'll find a lot of people are living in buildings that they wish they were not living in. So just communication will already bring about an arising of where we should be focusing. So we need to.
Yeah, we are losing you, Sabata. Is it my network, Mins? Can you still hear him?
No, I can't hear him.
Yeah, no, I think we've lost him. Yeah, no, I think on that note, maybe I will just close. Sabata, maybe. Okay.
From our end.
Yes, Sabata.
Because from our end,
we lost you.
We're seeing, I was saying from our end, what we see is that funders say there's a lack of bankable projects. So out of 10, not enough are bankable. And that's because they don't have technical input. So I think grants for SAIEE members to give technical input is critical.
Yeah, great stuff. Maybe on that, Sabata, in terms of now the public awareness, the role and education on top of that, play in driving the IoT based, obviously what we have shared to us, net zero adoption. Well, what is your take on that? What role does public awareness and education play in driving IoT?
I think public awareness is critical. So we have an intergenerational transition where schools already need to move to electric buses because children are feeling the effects of health. So there's pollution in the bus, then there's pollution in the air. So IoT will help us sense where these harmful effects are coming from. If there's pollution, if there's danger. So it's taking the same principles of sensing danger, we sense pollution, we sense things that we want to clean in our environment and even decarbonize. So IoT will help you sense levels of methane, sense all these things.
Yeah, no, great. No, I think, thank you, guys. I think because of time, 6 minutes before, maybe as we conclude today's webinar, I would like also to extend my genuine gratitude to our speakers, Mr. Atgun and Mr. Mtwebu. Forgive me for that. But they are very thoughtful, provoking insight, some key maybe takeaways that we can go with from this discussion of today. I think from Peter, what I've maybe noted here on my notes, IoT is an enabler, not just a solution. So I think from one of his case studies, the smart city success depends on clear strategies, governance, and citizen involvement. So that one of the keynote, maybe one of the key things that I noted as a takeaway, citizen engagement is very crucial. As we also learn from the case study that he shared, smart cities project must be inclusive to avoid some resistance, like what we also observe what happened in Toronto case study. Then also maybe if you look in terms of the data security and privacy, must be prioritized. Transparent governance models are essential for public. I think from the Barcelona case study we have learned that. So maybe, yeah, also collaboration is the key. Government just piggybacking on the discussion, government, private sector and communities must work together to make smart cities a reality. Then looking to our second speaker, maybe key takeaways that I've just noted down as we close. One of the notes that I took, IoT enhances financial viability, of which looking at things like smart data collection and modeling improve investment confidence in net zero buildings. So maybe one of the very attractive note that I've taken down, data-driven decision making is a key, of which where we look in terms of IoT allows real-time site survey, environmental assessment, and predictive modeling. Some of the things that he mentioned on his presentation. Maybe lastly, from his insightful details, IoT for sustainability, smart monitoring system help things like optimize energy efficiency, reduce operational cost. Yeah, so thanks, gentlemen. I'm really very humbled to have you today. And yeah, I also want to thank all of you, everyone who have attended and actively communicating in terms of questions. We really appreciate your involvement in this discussion. And also a special thanks to the organizers, MINS, and also the Smart City chapter, Deputy Chair, Secretary, and all members of the chapter for making this to be possible. And we really looking forward to do this more than we can. Then, yeah, no, thanks. This discussion are critical as we shape the future of smart and sustainability urban development in South Africa. For those who wish, obviously, I think Minx has been also projecting the screen there, wish to stay connected, follow the SAIEE Smart Cities chapter for updates and also for upcoming events and initiatives. And thank you once again and have a great evening. Thanks.